Hey folks, everything new under the sun. There's something going on in China, as there seems to always be. And it's right now, it's the lockdowns. Shanghai targets lockdown turning point by Wednesday. Shanghai is, I think there's like 300 million people locked down in China across many different cities right now. And it's very odd, rather. They're going after a zero COVID policy, but it's directly impacting the world economy, the global economy. And you would expect at this point that there should be no more lockdowns. They are continuing with it, however. Shanghai's long COVID lockdown poses a threat to the global society. Chinese lockdown will create shocks to American supply chains. Chinese officials violently arrest residents for breaking lockdown rules. That's kind of the latest, within the last 8 hours, the recent headlines. And this goes on. And there's ships backed up around the ports there around Shanghai, a significant backlog in the supply chain. And the question you got to ask is, what is China doing at this point? They've got their own vaccine. Doesn't that work? They pretty much all have natural immunity. Doesn't that work anymore? What are they worried about? In fact, they're still building quarantine centers. Do they know something we don't know? Are they seeing more severity of the disease where they are? Why are they continuing this zero COVID idea when the rest of the world has been through that and has kind of given up on all the lockdowns? And in fact, admitted we all have some sort of natural immunity at this point. Not to mention many different vaccines that are available. Well, this is a Zero Hedge article. Chinese lockdowns expand, raising more questions about Beijing's motives for shutting down. Growing lockdowns in China. It says, have me believing, the article's writer, more and more that the country isn't exactly crestfallen about the supply chain crisis it is creating for the rest of the world. Now, the suggestion here is that there's no reason for China at this point to lock down. They have the hospitals, resources, probably the natural immunity, the vaccines to deal with this and keep supply chains going. The suggestion is maybe they're doing this on purpose to cause the fall of the United States, of the greenback, of the world reserve currency, of the U.S. dollar. He goes on. Days ago, I wrote about the suspicions I had about China's latest round of COVID lockdowns. In that piece, I drew a conclusion that the country's COVID zero plan is irrational and egregious, and that China's lockdowns may have to do with something more than COVID. So this is pretty interesting. And again, you have to ask the question, why are they locking down so hard, especially in the port cities at this point? So far, to the point where there's videos of people screaming out the windows in their high-rise buildings. The Chinese are locking people in their buildings again. We heard about this at the beginning of the pandemic. There's people living in their offices at work in tents because the Chinese government won't allow them to go home and be with their family, because they may get COVID or may pass it along. They want everybody to stay at work. Three scenarios I floated for the potential reason China was overshooting the mark with its draconian lockdowns were: the CCP may be trying to usurp more power, and I think they have total power at this point anyways, just a de facto power that the Chinese government has, so I don't think that makes sense. There may be something about COVID that China knows that the rest of the world still doesn't know, and this is the question. Do they know that the recurrence of that this comes on strong for a particular wave, or is this maybe a new virus, a new pandemic that they're trying to lock down that has gotten out? There's lots of lies and misinformation, and you got to ask these questions and say, is this possible? Is that possible? When this first came out, all sorts of information was suppressed with this, even by the WHO taking so long to declare it a pandemic. Number 3, China is looking for an excuse to slow its production to put pressure on the Western world at this time when it is trying to separate further economically from the West. So, of course, we know that Russia and China are cooperating to some extent. China doesn't want to completely cooperate with Russia and alienate itself from the rest of the world. But on the other hand, China's trying to battle Western powers. China wants to have the world reserve currency in the yuan. China wants to be the hegemonic power, going into the next 15, 20 years, whatever. They want to be the next superpower, the next top superpower. They already are a superpower economically. And again, the question is, the pandemic didn't bring the U.S. to its knees, apparently. And could they now be putting pressure on them by way of these lockdowns and really choking the supply chain to maybe bring the United States to its knees? So it's a very interesting thing that's going on there. You can look up the videos of people screaming out the windows of their towers, or their apartment buildings. It's a very eerie situation there. So pay attention to that. Keep your eye on what's going there. Here's a graphic of the lockdowns in the top 100 cities. You can see from March into April, the lockdowns are not decreasing, they're increasing. So again, after 2 years of this, what is going on? It says it's important to remember that the rest of the world hasn't even recovered from the first 2 rounds of lockdowns nearly 2 years ago. Automakers globally are still mired in a semiconductor shortage. Store shelves in the U.S. remain sparsely stocked. Commodities and goods that would normally be available have multi-month backlogs. And for me, even, I ordered a new lower-end amateur radio to replace one of mine for communications. And it's on back order. Now, it's coming from Japan. But you better know that there are likely there is likely a large quantity of parts from it that come from China, raw materials, whatever it may be, semiconductors, etc. And so there's a backlog in anything, even if it's shipped from the United States. Everything in the United States likely comes from Asia. And so from 2020 onwards, you see an ever-increasing disrupted supply chain. So a very interesting thing, and this only gets worse. And there was articles about the fertilizer, the lack of fertilizer, the rail lines not transporting it, etc. That is an ongoing issue. All right, let's take a look at Russia and them declaring World War III, at least a propaganda arm, the Russian state TV. This is from metro.co.uk. Russian state TV declares World War III has started after sinking Moskova. So let's see if we can play this here. You can read the text. What it's escalated into, you can surely call World War III. We're definitely fighting against NATO infrastructure, if not NATO itself, she says. So again, that's Russian state TV. They're not going out on any limbs in terms of free speech or giving their opinion on it. That is very likely straight from the Kremlin. Maybe Putin himself saying, you know what, we need to warm people up to the idea of World War III. Or, Putin's not going to come out and declare World War III because then it would be all in for NATO. But really, this can be seen as a kind of a veiled threat to NATO, saying, you know what, basically our flagship going down, being destroyed, really was a declaration of World War III, because Ukraine wouldn't be getting these advanced weapons if it weren't for NATO and its NATO neighbors piling weapons, armory, and ammunition into Ukraine. So this is a big deal, and I think this is likely a warning from the Kremlin, from Putin, and maybe even himself, basically, declaring to the world that this is effectively what he considers World War III. Kremlin's main propaganda mouthpiece went into meltdown last night after the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet was taken out. Officials have refused to acknowledge Ukraine's claim it struck the ship with cruise missiles. It doesn't want to admit, this small country, Ukraine, actually took out its flagship vessel. but they're coming around the side of it. It almost sounds like the Palestinians, to be honest, about things in Israel. They're coming out around beside it and basically declaring that it was them. It says, but despite Russia's insistence it sunk because of fire, the Ukrainian capital was struck by rockets overnight. So if it wasn't Ukraine that took it out, and Russia's saying it's not Ukraine that did it, why would they go and bombard the capital with rockets overnight in apparent retaliation? So a sign that says Vladimir Putin wants revenge for the downing of a prized naval asset. The city has been spared aerial bombardment since Russian troops pulled out of the north, but there were strikes against Kiev, Kharkiv, and locations further west. Russia won. A Kremlin mouthpiece, which has championed the war, came close to acknowledging Ukraine sunk the Moskva by demanding a crushing response. So again, on the one hand, they don't acknowledge that Ukraine did it, but on the other hand, they come out and say, there's going to be a crushing response in Ukraine because of it. Again, she said, now we're definitely fighting against NATO infrastructure, if not NATO itself. And again, this is propaganda for the Russian people and those watching the rest of the world, saying, you took out one of our ships. This is World War III. We know NATO's involved in providing ammunition and supporting and providing resources. And so they are admitting, because NATO doesn't want to admit, that this is in fact World War III that we are seeing. It's not a conventional war like we would expect. It's not even a cyber war, which we all thought would be kind of what World War III would look like. It's this economic war / covert war where no one really wants to admit anything, but there are two sides, really. Russia against NATO, and NATO is doing everything it can, without stepping over whatever line they believe that Putin has, to prop up Ukraine and to ensure that Ukraine is able to keep battling another day against Russia. So this is a big deal, and this graphic kind of shows. I guess I can't click on it, but the graphic kind of shows what was happening there. Odessa, there was a missile, an anti-ship battery in Odessa there, where the number 2 is, and so that fired on the vessel, hit the vessel. 2 Neptune cruise missiles strike the Moskva on the Prat side, causing an explosion, it says. And then number 1, that's drones. Multiple Bayraktar drones used to distract the ship's defenses flew around the ship, basically, and I guess had the ship pointing its radar, watching these drones, expecting the drones to do something. Meanwhile, this anti-ship battery fired at the ship, and was enough to did enough damage, effectively, to cause it fire on board and enough to sink it. That's significant. So that is a big deal for Ukrainian forces to take out the ship by Russia, from Russia rather. So a declaration of World War III. This is no longer conspiracy theory or hearsay. Russian state TV is basically declaring World War III, and it's against NATO. By the way, do you live in a NATO country? I live in Canada, which is we have northern neighbors of Russia, all along the tips of Siberia and northern Russia. There could easily be weapons fly across there. Now, Putin is not likely to do such an overt conventional war, because that would escalate into nuclear war very, very quickly. But he is basically warning NATO, saying all options are on the table now because you took out my flagship. And now, I think the gloves are off at this point for Putin. And there is really no way for Putin to save face. And the fact that his flagship was taken out is just another slap in the face. And he's already had several. So there is no backing down by Putin at this point, I don't believe. There is no saving face for him. He can't do anything against these world sanctions. So we're heading into an energy crisis, a world economic crisis and economic collapse, and China is helping, maybe even with these lockdowns, quote, that are because of quote unquote COVID and the pandemic. That's the excuse anyways. And you gotta, in terms of public health, the Chinese officials, even if it is public health, they're also looking at the other consequences. They're not stupid people. They're realizing there's massive economic consequences, and this, in fact, may be a retaliation for China against the United States and Europe on the economic sanctions in Russia. So it's a different side of the story that you need to think about and be prepared for significant fallout from this sort of thing. There's all sorts of talk and chatter going on behind the scenes that you and I probably never hear. And this is one scenario that is playing out, and this is probably actually what is happening based on what I see in the news, at least that we can glean from it. So I'll leave it there, guys. World War III has started. I think that's hands down the truth at this point. And we don't know what or how World War III will be won. We don't exactly know even how it's going to be fought, other than what has transpired already, mainly economic warfare. Wait until the cyber attacks start. So this is the big thing that may be coming next. So be prepared, folks. Thanks for watching. I'll leave it there, and we'll see you in the next video.